The air hung heavy with dust and disappointment as Clara Thompson stood frozen outside Doc Wilson's office, his words still ringing in her ears like a death knell for dreams she'd carried since childhood. "I'm sorry, Miss Thompson, but you'll never be able to bear children of your own." The Montana Territory of 1876 was unforgiving in many ways, but this verdict felt like the cruelest blow yet. Clara brushed away a tear with a trembling hand, her 22 years suddenly feeling like a lifetime of emptiness stretched before her. She straightened her simple blue dress, took a deep breath of the late summer air, and began the long walk back to her small homestead outside of Silver Creek. The main street bustled with afternoon activity, men loading supplies, women gossiping outside the general store, children playing in the dirt road, each sight now a small dagger to her heart. "Watch yourself there, miss." A deep voice called out just as Clara, lost in her thoughts, nearly walked directly into the path of an approaching wagon. A strong hand caught her elbow, steadying her as she jumped back. "I'm sorry, I wasn't looking where." Clara's apology died on her lips as she looked up into the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a sun-bronzed face partially shadowed by a well-worn Stetson. "No harm done," the stranger said, releasing her arm once she was steady. "Though it'd be a shame to see someone as pretty as you trampled on my account." A slight smile softened his weathered features. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you for the warning, Mr. Mason Keller," he replied with a slight tip of his hat. "Just passing through town with a herd headed north to Fort Benton." Clara Thompson. She found herself returning his smile despite the heaviness in her heart. "Welcome to Silver Creek, Mr. Keller, brief as your stay might be." Mason studied her face, his expression shifting from friendly to concerned. "Begging your pardon, Miss Thompson, but you look like you've received some troubling news. Is there anything I can help with?" The unexpected kindness from a stranger nearly broke Clara's composure. "Nothing that can be fixed, I'm afraid. But thank you for asking." Mason nodded, respecting her privacy. "Well, if you need anything while I'm in town, I'll be camping with my boys just outside the north end for a few days, getting supplies and giving the cattle a rest." "That's kind of you, Mr. Keller." Clara stepped back, suddenly aware of the townspeople watching their exchange with curious eyes. In a small town like Silver Creek, a single woman speaking to a handsome stranger was fodder for gossip. "I should be going now. Safe travels on your drive." As Clara continued down the street, she could feel Mason's eyes following her. For just a moment, the crushing weight of Doc Wilson's diagnosis lifted, replaced by a flutter of something she couldn't quite name. But she quickly suppressed it. What man would want a woman who couldn't give him children? Her one purpose as a wife, denied by her own body's failure. By the time Clara reached her small homestead, a modest cabin and plot of land left to her by her late parents, the sun was beginning to set. She tended to her few animals, fed the chickens, and milked her cow before finally allowing herself to collapse at her kitchen table. Only then, in the privacy of her home, did she let the tears flow freely. "It's not fair," she whispered to the empty room. "All I ever wanted was a family of my own." Clara had grown up watching her mother lovingly care for her and her siblings. When fever took both her parents and younger brothers 3 years ago, Clara had clung to the dream that someday she would have her own children to love. Now that dream had been snatched away by the doctor's cold pronouncement about her woman's condition that made childbearing impossible. After crying until no more tears would come, Clara washed her face with cold water from the basin and prepared for bed. Tomorrow was market day, and she needed to bring her eggs and extra milk to town. Life continued, dreams or no dreams. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Clara dressed in her second-best dress, a simple brown calico with small white flowers, and loaded her wagon with her goods for market. The drive into town was peaceful, giving her time to compose herself. She would face the townsfolk with dignity, not letting on that anything was amiss. The market square was already bustling when Clara arrived. She set up her small stand between Mrs. Hendricks, who sold beautiful quilts, and old Mr. Peterson with his honey jars. Clara had just arranged her last basket of eggs when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "Good morning, Miss Thompson." She turned to find Mason Keller standing there, looking even more handsome in the daylight. He'd shaved, and his dark hair was neatly combed beneath his hat. His shirt, though simple, was clean, and his vest showed signs of recent brushing. "Mr. Keller, what a surprise," Clara said, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "I thought you'd be busy with your cattle. My foreman has things well in hand. Thought I'd see what Silver Creek has to offer." His eyes never left her face. "Seems I've found something worth looking at." Clara felt her cheeks warm again. "You shouldn't say such things, Mr. Keller. People will talk." "Let them," he said with a careless shrug. "Would you allow me to buy some of your eggs? Our cook would appreciate something fresh." "Of course." Clara carefully counted out a dozen eggs into a small basket. As she handed them over, their fingers brushed, sending an unexpected jolt through her. Mason paid her, then lingered. "I was wondering if you might show me around town a bit. Being a stranger here, I could use a guide." Clara hesitated. She rarely spent time with men, not since Jeremy Collins had courted her briefly last year, before choosing Sally Miller instead. But something about Mason's direct gaze and gentle manner made her nod. "I suppose I could, once the market clears at noon." His smile was worth the risk of gossip. "I'll be back then." True to his word, Mason returned as the market was winding down. Clara had sold most of her goods and was pleased with the coins in her pocket. She'd need them for winter provisions. "Ready for that tour, Miss Thompson?" Mason asked, offering his arm in a gentlemanly gesture. Clara hesitated only briefly before placing her hand on his forearm. "There's not much to see in Silver Creek, Mr. Keller." "Then we'll walk slowly," he replied with a wink. They strolled through the small town, Clara pointing out the church, the schoolhouse where she sometimes helped teach, and the few businesses that kept Silver Creek alive. Mason listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest. "And what about you, Miss Thompson? Have you always lived here?" he asked as they paused near the small town square. "Born and raised," Clara answered. "My parents homesteaded just outside town. After they passed, I stayed on to work the land." "All alone?" Mason's tone held concern. Clara lifted her chin slightly. "I manage." "What about you, Mr. Keller? Where do you call home?" "I've got a ranch down near the Wyoming border. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. Paid for with 5 years of driving other men's cattle." Pride colored his voice. "This is my first drive with my own herd." "That's quite an accomplishment," Clara said sincerely. "Been working toward it since I was 16. Mason guided her to a bench beneath a large cottonwood tree. "My pa died in the war, left my ma with 4 kids and no money. I started working cattle as soon as I could lift a rope." Clara felt a kinship with his struggle. "My parents worked hard for everything we had too." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Mason spoke again. "Would you tell me what troubled you yesterday, Miss Thompson? I don't mean to pry, but sometimes talking helps." The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. Clara looked down at her hands. "I received some difficult news from Doc Wilson." Mason waited patiently, not pushing. "He told me I'll never be able to have children," Clara finally said, the words burning her throat. "Something about my woman's parts not being formed right." She blushed at speaking so plainly to a man she barely knew. Mason's expression showed no disgust or pity, only genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry, Miss Thompson. That's a heavy burden for anyone to bear." "It shouldn't matter," Clara said, trying to sound braver than she felt. "There are plenty of women who never marry or have children." "But it matters to you," Mason said softly. Clara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "For what it's worth," Mason continued, "I think there's more than one way to make a family in this world." Before Clara could ask what he meant, they were interrupted by the town's busybody, Mrs. Winters. "Clara Thompson, what on earth are you doing sitting out here with a strange man?" The older woman's voice carried across the square, drawing attention from passers-by. Clara stood quickly, smoothing her skirt. "I was just showing Mr. Keller around town, Mrs. Winters. He's passing through with a cattle drive." Mrs. Winters sniffed disapprovingly. "Your dear mother would be shocked at such behavior, young lady." Mason stood, tipping his hat politely to the older woman. "The fault is entirely mine, madam. I insisted Miss Thompson show me the town, being a stranger here." Mrs. Winters was not appeased. "Well, it's highly improper. Clara, you should be heading home now. It's not seemly for an unmarried woman to be seen with a cowboy." Clara felt both embarrassment and anger rise within her. Before she could respond, Mason spoke again. "You're absolutely right, madam. In fact, I was just about to escort Miss Thompson back to her wagon. With your permission, of course. The older woman seemed taken aback by his politeness. Well, I suppose that would be acceptable. But directly to her wagon, young man. Yes, madam. Mason agreed with such exaggerated deference that Clara had to bite her lip to keep from smiling. As they walked away, Mason leaned close to whisper, "Is she the town dragon?" Clara couldn't help the laugh that escaped. Mrs. Winters has appointed herself guardian of Silver Creek's morals. She means well, I suppose. I've met her type in every town from Texas to Montana, Mason said with a grin, usually hiding the most secrets themselves. When they reached Clara's wagon, Mason helped her up to the seat with strong, steady hands. Would it be terribly forward of me to ask if I might call on you properly tomorrow? I'd like to see that homestead of yours, if you're willing. Clara knew she should refuse. A passing cowboy was no one to get attached to. But something in Mason's eyes, earnest and kind, made her nod. I live about 2 miles east of town. The small white cabin with the red barn. I'll find it, Mason promised. Say, around midday? I'll have dinner ready, Clara replied, surprising herself with the offer. Mason's smile was bright enough to rival the sun. I look forward to it, Miss Thompson. As Clara drove home, she couldn't help the small flutter of excitement in her chest. It had been a long time since she'd had company, even longer since she'd felt this strange attraction. But she reminded herself sternly that nothing could come of it. Mason Keller was just passing through, and even if he weren't, what man wanted a wife who couldn't give him children? Still, as she prepared her simple cabin the next morning, Clara found herself taking extra care. She put fresh wildflowers on the table and wore her best dress, the blue one that matched her eyes, according to her mother. She baked fresh bread and prepared a chicken stew that had been simmering since dawn. Just before noon, she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Clara smoothed her hair, took a deep breath, and went outside to greet her visitor. Mason Keller looked like he belonged on her homestead, sitting tall and confident on his chestnut gelding. He dressed carefully too. Clara noticed clean shirt, polished boots, and he'd trimmed his dark beard. He dismounted with easy grace, leading his horse to the hitching post. Miss Thompson, he greeted her, removing his hat. Your directions were perfect. This is a fine piece of land you have here. Clara felt absurdly pleased by his approval. Thank you, Mr. Keller. My father chose it for the good water and soil. He chose well. And please, call me Mason. Mr. Keller makes me feel like my father. Then you must call me Clara, she replied, feeling strangely bold. Mason smiled, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. Clara it is. She showed him around the small homestead, the vegetable garden she tended, the chicken coop, the cow and 2 goats, and the small orchard her father had planted years ago. Mason asked thoughtful questions and offered genuine compliments on her hard work. It can't be easy managing all this alone, he said as they walked back toward the cabin. Clara shrugged. I hire the Peterson boys for the heavy work when needed. Otherwise, I manage. You're quite remarkable, Mason said, his tone making it clear this was not empty flattery. Clara felt her cheeks warm. Dinner should be ready. I hope you're hungry. Starving, Mason admitted with a grin. Trail food gets mighty tiresome. Inside, Clara served the stew and fresh bread. Mason ate with appreciation, complimenting her cooking so enthusiastically that she had to laugh. It's just simple food, she protested. Nothing simple about a meal made with care, Mason replied. My mother always said you could taste love in good cooking. They talked easily through the meal. Mason told stories of his cattle drives, of the ranch he was building, of his dreams for the future. Clara found herself sharing stories of her own childhood, of her parents and brothers, of her life in Silver Creek. I've been saving to expand, she admitted. Maybe get a few more cattle. Make this place profitable enough to hire regular help. That's smart thinking, Mason nodded approvingly. Cattle prices are good right now. After they'd eaten, they sat on Clara's small porch, watching the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the land. Clara couldn't remember when she'd last felt so comfortable with anyone. I'll be moving the herd out day after tomorrow, Mason said finally, breaking a comfortable silence. Clara felt a sharp pang of disappointment. So soon. Need to reach Fort Benton before the weather turns. He turned to look at her, his expression serious. Clara, I'd like to write to you, if you'd allow it. Her heart skipped a beat. I'd like that very much. I'll be coming back this way in the spring, he continued. Would it be too forward to say I'd like to call on you again then? Clara hesitated, the doctor's words echoing in her mind. Mason, you should know. What I told you yesterday about not being able to have children, that's not going to change. Any man courting me would need to accept that. Mason's expression remained steady. I heard you. It doesn't change my wish to know you better. Most men want sons to carry on their name, to work their land. Clara pressed, needing him to understand. I'm not most men, Mason replied simply. And there are children in this world who need homes, Clara. Family isn't always about blood. The thought had never occurred to Clara. You mean, taking in orphans? Mason nodded. My mother raised my cousin's 2 boys after she died in childbirth. They're as much my brothers as the ones born to her. Hope fragile and tentative bloomed in Clara's chest. I never considered that possibility. There's always possibilities, if you're willing to look for them. Mason reached over, his hand covering hers. May I write to you, Clara? She turned her hand under his, their fingers intertwining. Yes, Mason. I'd like that very much. The next evening, Mason brought Clara to meet his trail boss and cook over a proper supper at their camp. The men were respectful, clearly taking their cue from Mason's obvious regard for her. Clara enjoyed the lively conversation and the chance to see Mason in his element, confident and respected by his men. When he rode with her back to her homestead under a star-filled sky, Clara felt a contentment she hadn't experienced in years. Will you see me off tomorrow? Mason asked as he helped her down from her wagon. What time do you leave? First light. I know it's early. I'll be there, Clara promised. True to her word, Clara arrived at the cattle camp just as dawn was breaking the next morning. The camp was already bustling with activity as the men prepared for the trail. Mason spotted her immediately, leaving his conversation with the trail boss to stride toward her. You came, he said, his smile warming her more than the rising sun. I said I would. Clara held out a small package. Some biscuits and jerky for your journey. Mason took the package, his fingers lingering against hers. Thank you. They stood looking at each other, so much unsaid between them. Finally, Mason spoke. I meant what I said, Clara. All right, and I'll be back in the spring. I'll be waiting, she replied softly. Mason glanced around, then stepped closer. Would it be too forward if I asked for something to remember you by? Clara's heart raced. What did you have in mind, Mr. Keller? His eyes dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, asking a silent question. Clara gave a small nod, and Mason leaned down, pressing his lips gently against hers. The kiss was brief but tender, a promise of things to come. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with emotion. Something to carry with me on the long nights ahead. Mason, the trail boss called. Time to move out. Mason squeezed Clara's hand one last time. Until spring, Clara Thompson. Clara watched as Mason mounted his horse, tipped his hat to her one last time, and rode out with his men and cattle. Only when the dust had settled and the herd was a distant smudge on the horizon did she turn her wagon toward home, her lips still tingling from his kiss. The first letter arrived 3 weeks later, carried by a traveler passing through Fort Benton. Mason's handwriting was surprisingly neat, his words thoughtful as he described the journey north, the successful sale of his cattle, and his plans for returning to his ranch. He asked about her preparations for winter, whether she'd decided about buying cattle, and if the town gossips had found new victims yet. Clara read the letter so many times she nearly wore the paper thin. She wrote back the same day, her own letter full of news about Silver Creek, her decision to buy 3 cows from the Taylor Ranch, and how Mrs. Winters had indeed found a new target in the young teacher who wore her skirts scandalously high. As autumn deepened into winter, the letters continued. Mason wrote of his ranch, the small house he'd built, the land he was clearing, the cattle he was breeding. Clara shared stories of Silver Creek's winter festivities, the progress on her homestead, and her thoughts about the future. With each letter, Clara felt her connection to Mason growing stronger. He never mentioned her inability to bear children again, but he did write about his cousin's boys, now grown men with families of their own, and about a family on a neighboring ranch who had taken in 3 orphans from back east. When the first wildflowers appeared in the spring of 1877, Clara found herself watching the road from town with increasing anticipation. Mason's last letter, sent a month earlier, had promised he would arrive with the spring grass. It was a particularly fine April morning when Clara, hanging laundry in her yard, heard the distinctive sound of an approaching rider. She shaded her eyes against the sun, her heart leaping when she recognized the chestnut gelding and the man astride it. Mason Keller looked even better than she remembered, his shoulders broader, his face more tanned, his smile just as warm when he spotted her. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, crossing the yard with long strides. Clara barely had time to smooth her hair before he was standing before her, hat in hand, his blue eyes drinking her in. "Clara Thompson," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're even more beautiful than I remembered." "Mason," she breathed, suddenly shy despite the months of letters between them. "You're finally here. I'd have come sooner if the passes hadn't been blocked with late snow." He reached out, taking her hand in his. "May I?" At her nod, he pulled her gently into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that felt like coming home. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Clara's life. Mason stayed in town, renting a room above the Mercantile, but spent most days at her homestead. They worked side by side, repairing winter damage, planting her garden, and tending to her small herd of cattle. In the evenings, they would sit on her porch, talking about everything and nothing as the sun set over the Montana landscape. On Sundays, Mason accompanied Clara to church, enduring the curious stares and whispers with good humor. "Let them talk," he said when Clara worried about the gossip. "I'm not hiding my intentions toward you." Those intentions became clear one warm evening in late May. They had ridden to a hilltop overlooking both their properties. Mason had purchased land adjoining hers, explaining that it made good business sense to expand in familiar territory. As they spread a blanket for their picnic supper, Mason seemed uncharacteristically nervous. He barely touched the fried chicken and biscuits Clara had packed, and he kept reaching into his pocket as if checking for something. "Mason, is everything all right?" Clara finally asked. "You've hardly eaten a bite." "Everything's perfect," he replied. "Or it will be, if you answer a question I have for you." Clara's heart began to race as Mason shifted to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Clara Thompson, these past months have shown me what kind of woman you are: strong, kind, determined, and more beautiful inside and out than any woman I've ever known." His voice was steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I know we've talked around this subject in our letters, but I need to say it plainly now." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring, a simple gold band with a modest diamond that caught the evening sunlight. "I love you, Clara. I want to build a life with you, to join our lands and our lives together. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to see this valley filled with our family however God chooses to bring them to us." Mason's eyes held hers. "Will you marry me, Clara? Will you be my wife?" Tears filled Clara's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Mason, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "It was my mother's," he explained. "She made me promise to give it only to the woman who captured my heart completely." "It's perfect," Clara said, admiring how the ring seemed to belong on her hand. "I'll treasure it always." Mason pulled her close, sealing their engagement with a kiss that promised a lifetime of love. They were married on a perfect June day in Silver Creek's small church, with the whole town in attendance. Clara wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit her smaller frame, with wildflowers in her hair. Mason stood tall and proud in a new suit, his eyes never leaving Clara as she walked down the aisle on the arm of Mr. Peterson, who had been like a second father to her since her parents' passing. The reception was held on Clara's now their homestead, with tables set up under the trees and lanterns hung for when darkness fell. Even Mrs. Winters seemed genuinely happy for them, telling Clara that she'd finally found a good man worth settling for. When the last guest had gone and they were finally alone, Mason carried Clara across the threshold of her cabin, their home, until the larger house they planned was built. "Welcome home, Mrs. Keller," he whispered against her lips. "I love the sound of that," Clara replied, twining her arms around his neck. That night, as Mason's gentle hands and tender words showed her the physical side of love she'd only vaguely understood before, Clara thanked God for sending this man into her life, a man who saw beyond her limitations to the woman she was inside. As summer turned to fall, Clara and Mason settled into married life with a joy that seemed to grow with each passing day. They worked hard, expanding their herds, improving their land, and beginning construction on the larger home that would eventually replace Clara's small cabin. Their nights were filled with love and laughter, their days with shared purpose. It was in late October, as they sat before the fire discussing their plans for the coming year, that Mason broached a subject they'd spoken of only in general terms before. "I heard something interesting in town today," he began, his fingers idly stroking Clara's hair as she leaned against him. "Reverend Thomas mentioned that the orphanage in Helena is overflowing with children. Apparently, there was a fever outbreak in the mining camps, left a lot of little ones without parents." Clara sat up straighter, her heart beating faster. "Are they looking for homes for the children?" Mason nodded. "The Reverend said they're desperate for good families willing to take them in. He's organizing a group to travel there next month." He watched her face carefully. "I thought perhaps we might go, see if there's a child who needs us as much as we need them." Tears filled Clara's eyes. "Do you really mean it, Mason? You'd want to adopt a child so soon?" "I've been thinking about it since before we married," he admitted. "Watching you these past months, the love you have to give, the kind of mother you'd be, it seems wrong to wait when there are children who need that love now." Clara threw her arms around him, her tears dampening his shirt. "Yes," she whispered. "Oh, Mason, yes." The journey to Helena in November was long and tiring, but Clara hardly noticed the discomfort. Her heart was too full of anticipation. She and Mason had discussed their hopes at length. They were open to a boy or girl, any age, though Mason gently suggested that a slightly older child might adjust better to their remote homestead than an infant. The orphanage in Helena was a large, austere building that echoed with the sounds of children. The matron, Mrs. Blackwell, was a stern-faced woman who clearly did her best with limited resources. She led Clara and Mason through dormitory-style rooms filled with children of all ages, explaining that most of the younger ones were quickly placed, while older children and siblings who refused to be separated often remained. "We don't want to separate families," Clara told the woman firmly. "If there are brothers or sisters who need to stay together, we'd consider that a blessing, not a burden." Mrs. Blackwell's expression softened slightly. "In that case, there's a pair I'd like you to meet. Follow me." She led them to a small classroom where about a dozen children were practicing their letters. Mrs. Blackwell pointed to a corner where a girl of about 7 sat beside a smaller boy, perhaps 4 or 5. The girl had her arm protectively around the boy's shoulders as she helped him form his letters. "That's Madeline and Thomas Carter," Mrs. Blackwell explained. "Their parents died in the fever outbreak 3 months ago. Madeline's very bright, and she's devoted to her brother. We've had interest in her from several families, but she refuses to be separated from Thomas, and most folks only want one child." Clara felt an immediate connection to the children, especially the girl with her protective stance. "Could we speak with them?" Mrs. Blackwell nodded and called the children over. Madeline approached cautiously, keeping Thomas slightly behind her, her hazel eyes wary but intelligent. "Madeline, Thomas, this is Mr. and Mrs. Keller. They'd like to talk with you for a bit." Clara knelt down to be at eye level with the children. "Hello, Madeline." "Hello, Thomas. My name is Clara, and this is my husband, Mason." Thomas peeked out from behind his sister. "Are you going to take Maddie away?" His voice was small but defiant. "No, sweetheart," Clara assured him. "We would never separate you from your sister." Madeline's posture relaxed slightly. "Do you have other children?" she asked. "No," Mason said, crouching beside Clara. "We don't have any children yet, but we have a ranch with lots of animals, and we've been hoping to find children who might want to be part of our family. Both of us." Madeline pressed, her arm tightening around Thomas. "Both of you," Clara confirmed. "We'd never separate a brother and sister who love each other so much." Slowly, cautiously, a conversation began. Clara and Mason learned that Madeline loved to read and was good with numbers, that Thomas was afraid of the dark but loved animals, and that both children missed their parents terribly but were trying to be brave. "Would you like to know about our home?" Mason asked after a while. When both children nodded, he described the ranch, the horses and cattle, the chickens that needed feeding, the garden Clara tended, the big house they were building with rooms for each of them. Would we have chores? Madeline asked seriously. Yes, Clara answered honestly. Everyone in a family helps out, but you'd also have time to play and learn. And you wouldn't make us sleep in different houses? Thomas asked, his lower lip trembling slightly. Never, Mason promised. You'd be brother and sister, just as you are now. By the end of the hour, Thomas was sitting on Mason's knee, examining his watch with fascination, while Madeline had moved close enough to Clara to touch the ribbon on her dress. We'd like to come back tomorrow, if that's all right, Clara told the children as they prepared to leave. We're staying in town for a few days. Madeline nodded, a tentative smile finally appearing. I'll help Thomas practice his letters more before you come. That night, in their hotel room, Clara and Mason talked long into the night about the children. There was no question in either of their minds these were the children meant for them. Did you see how protective Madeline is of her brother? Clara said. She's so young to carry such responsibility. She reminds me of you, Mason replied, stroking Clara's cheek. Strong and determined, with a heart full of love. And Thomas, he's so curious and brave despite everything he's been through. Clara leaned into Mason's touch. They're perfect, Mason. Then we'll begin the process tomorrow, he decided. We'll talk to Mrs. Blackwell about what's needed to make them legally ours. The next several days were filled with visits to the children, meetings with the orphanage board, and paperwork that would allow Clara and Mason to bring Madeline and Thomas home. Each day, the children grew more comfortable with them, and by the end of the week, Thomas was calling Mason Sir with such admiration that it brought tears to the cowboy's eyes. On their final visit before the official adoption would be complete, Clara brought small gifts for the children, a doll she'd sewn for Madeline and a wooden horse Mason had carved for Thomas. These are to remind you that we're coming back for you, Clara explained as the children examined their presents with wonder. In just 2 weeks, we'll return to bring you home with us for good. Forever? Thomas asked, clutching his horse. Forever, Mason confirmed. You'll be Madeline and Thomas Keller, our daughter and son. Madeline looked up at them, her young face solemn. My mama told me before she died that God would find us a new family who would love us. I think she meant you. Clara couldn't hold back her tears as she gathered both children in her arms. I think she did too, sweetheart. I think she did too. The 2 weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity as Clara and Mason prepared their home for the children. They set up bedrooms in the cabin, knowing the new house wouldn't be ready until spring. They bought books and clothes, prepared special meals to welcome them, and tried to think of everything the children might need to feel at home. When the day finally came to return to Helena, Clara could hardly contain her excitement. The journey seemed twice as long as before, her impatience growing with every mile. At the orphanage, Madeline and Thomas were waiting, their few possessions packed in small bundles. Thomas ran to Mason as soon as he saw him, while Madeline walked quickly to Clara, trying to maintain her dignity even as her eyes shone with happiness. Are you ready to come home? Clara asked, hugging the girl close. Yes, madam, Madeline replied. Then, in a whisper, can I call you Mama? Thomas wants to know if it's all right. Clara's heart felt ready to burst. Of course you can, sweetheart. I'd be honored to be your mama. The journey home was filled with stories, questions, and growing bonds. Thomas fell asleep against Mason's chest on the train, while Madeline sat close to Clara, pointing out interesting sights through the window. When they finally arrived at the homestead, both children's eyes widened at the sight of their new home. The cabin looked especially welcoming, with smoke curling from the chimney where their neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, had kept a fire going for their arrival. Welcome home, children, Mason said, lifting Thomas onto his shoulders so he could see farther. All of this is yours to explore, Clara added, her arm around Madeline's shoulders. And tomorrow, we'll show you the animals and the land. That first night as a family, as Clara tucked the children into their new beds, she felt a completeness she had never thought possible. When Thomas sleepily asked for a story, and Madeline requested a second goodnight kiss, Clara knew she had found her purpose. Later, when the children were asleep, she found Mason standing in the doorway of their room, watching them with a tender expression. Happy? He asked softly as she joined him. More than I ever dreamed possible, Clara replied, leaning against his strong chest. You gave me this, Mason. You gave me a family when I thought it was impossible. Mason wrapped his arms around her. We gave each other a family, Clara. Those children needed us as much as we needed them. God brought us all together, she murmured. First you to me, then us to them. And this is just the beginning, Mason promised, kissing the top of her head. Our family might grow even more someday. There are plenty of children who need homes. Clara looked up at her husband, love overflowing in her heart. I'd like that. But for now, let's enjoy the miracle we've been given. The days turned to weeks, the weeks to months, and the seasons changed as the Keller family grew together in love and understanding. There were challenges, of course, Madeline's nightmares about losing another family, Thomas's occasional tantrums when overwhelmed by change, the adjustments all of them made as they learned to be a family. But there was joy too, so much joy. The first time Thomas rode his own pony, his face alight with pride. Madeline's delight in having her own garden plot to tend. The children's excitement when they moved into the new house Mason had built, with large bedrooms and a special playroom just for them. By the children's first Christmas with the Kellers, no one watching them would have guessed they hadn't always been a family. Madeline had blossomed under Clara's gentle guidance, her natural intelligence flourishing with regular lessons and plenty of books. Thomas had become Mason's shadow, learning about ranch life with enthusiasm and developing a special way with the animals. It was on Christmas Eve, with the house decorated with pine boughs and homemade ornaments, that Clara received a gift she hadn't expected. As the family sat before the fire, enjoying the quiet evening after the children had hung their stockings, Mason handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. What's this? Clara asked, surprised. We agreed to exchange gifts tomorrow. This one couldn't wait, Mason replied with a mysterious smile. Open it. Inside was a letter from the orphanage in Helena. Clara read it quickly, then looked up at Mason with wide eyes. A baby girl? She whispered. They have a 3-month-old baby girl with no family? Mason nodded. Mrs. Blackwell wrote to ask if we might consider taking her. She remembered how good you were with the children, and... He hesitated. She knows we wanted a large family. Clara looked at Madeline and Thomas, who were watching with curious expressions. What do you think, children? Would you like a baby sister? Madeline's face lit up. A real baby? That we could keep forever, like you kept us? Just like that, Mason confirmed. I could help take care of her, Madeline said eagerly. I helped with the babies at the orphanage sometimes. Thomas considered the idea seriously. Would she cry a lot? Probably, Clara admitted. Babies do. But she'd grow and learn, just like you're growing and learning. Thomas nodded solemnly. Then I think it's all right. I could be a big brother. Clara looked back at Mason, her eyes shining with tears of joy. When can we get her? I wrote back already, telling them yes. If the weather holds, we can travel after New Year's. Mason reached for her hand. Her name is Grace. Mrs. Blackwell thought it suited her. Grace Keller, Clara said softly. It's perfect. And so, in January of 1878, the Keller family grew again, welcoming tiny Grace into their home and hearts. The baby, with her shock of dark hair and curious blue eyes, quickly became the center of attention. Madeline proved to be a wonderful helper, while Thomas appointed himself Grace's special protector, carefully showing her his toys and explaining important things about their home. As Clara watched Mason walking the floor with Grace one night, his large hands cradling the tiny infant with such tenderness, she felt her heart might burst with happiness. What are you thinking? Mason asked, catching her watching them. I'm thinking about the day we met, Clara replied. How I'd just been told I'd never be a mother, and there you were, stopping me from walking in front of a wagon. Mason smiled. God works in mysterious ways. Indeed he does, Clara agreed, coming to stand beside them, her hand gently stroking Grace's downy head. You held me close when I was broken, Mason, and now look at us 3 children and a home filled with love. And I've never been happier, Mason said, leaning down to kiss her softly. You're the best mother these children could have asked for. And you're the best father, Clara replied. Together, we're exactly what they need. In the years that followed, the Keller ranch flourished, as did their family. 2 years after Grace joined them, they adopted twin boys Jamie and Joseph, whose parents had died in a stage accident. The ranch expanded, requiring additional hands, and Mason's cattle business thrived under his careful management. Clara found her calling not only as a mother, but as an advocate for orphaned children throughout the territory. Working with Reverend Thomas, she helped establish a network of families willing to open their homes, believing deeply that every child deserved the love of a family. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as Clara and Mason sat on the porch of their home, watching their 5 children play in the yard, Mason squeezed her hand gently. "Any regrets?" he asked. Clara looked at the scene before her. Madeline, now 17 and talking about becoming a teacher. Thomas, 15 and already showing Mason's skill with horses. Grace, 10 and as lively as her name suggested. And the twins, 8 and inseparable, always in the middle of some adventure. "Not a single one," she replied, her heart full to overflowing. "You gave me more than I ever dreamed possible, Mason Keller." "We gave each other a family," he corrected, echoing his words from years before. "And I thank God every day for bringing you into my life." As the sun set over the Montana landscape they both loved, Clara leaned her head against her husband's strong shoulder, content in the knowledge that sometimes the greatest blessings come from the deepest disappointments. She had been told she would never be a mother, but God and a kind-hearted cowboy had shown her that motherhood came in many forms, all of them beautiful, all of them precious, and all of them worth every moment of the journey. "I love you, Mason," she whispered. "And I love you, Clara Keller," he replied. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the days to come." And as their children's laughter filled the evening air, Clara knew with absolute certainty that this family, this love, this life was exactly where she was meant to be.